Hello, everyone. In this in-depth cinematic exposé, Ron Howard steps forward not as the friendly, award-winning director audiences have come to know, but as a seasoned Hollywood insider pulling back the velvet curtain on an era that has long been mythologized as glamorous, innocent, and golden. Howard explains that behind the gleaming marquees, the sparkling gowns, and the carefully crafted publicity images, Hollywood's golden age was a labyrinth of unchecked power, ruthless ambition, and shadowy behaviors the public never saw, because the studios functioned like governments, controlling newspapers, manipulating police departments, and shaping public perception with terrifying precision. And as Howard guides us through the stories of 6 actors whose public legacies were built on lies, the audience begins to understand why so many truths remained buried for decades. He begins with the first figure, a universally adored matinee idol whose face graced calendars, cigarette ads, and billboards, the kind of actor whose smile alone could sell out a theater. Yet Howard reveals that in private, this actor was infamous for violent outbursts, temper tantrums, and shocking cruelty toward those beneath him on the Hollywood hierarchy, especially aspiring actresses whom he regularly humiliated, berated, or manipulated, while the studio quietly paid off rumors, silenced victims, and rewrote police encounters to preserve the illusion of a man who was supposedly wholesome and charming. And Howard narrates how internal studio correspondence, long hidden, shows executives repeatedly covering up drunken assaults, disappearing witnesses, and violent altercations on set that would have destroyed any normal career. The second actor on Howard's list provides a striking contrast, for he was known as a lovable comedic genius, a clownish figure who seemed incapable of malice, but whose behind-the-scenes behavior was so manipulative and domineering that dozens of writers and stunt performers avoided him entirely. Howard describes how this comedian weaponized fear, berated staff until they cried, forced inexperienced stand-ins to perform dangerous gags he refused to do himself, and exploited bankruptcy laws to avoid paying ex-employees, all while cultivating a public persona that made him appear childlike and harmless. And Howard adds the chilling detail that the actor kept a private collection of files on his co-workers' weaknesses so he could threaten to get them fired or blacklisted if they challenged him. The third individual Howard exposes is a brooding, dramatic legend often praised for playing tormented heroes. But Howard explains that his real-life darkness far surpassed anything he portrayed on screen, as former assistants, long-retired studio fixers, and estranged family members have revealed stories of psychological manipulation, emotional blackmail, and vindictive mind games, including how this actor nurtured and exploited unstable protégés, isolating them from friends and family, promising them roles and mentorship, then systematically destroying their confidence and their careers if they showed signs of independence or dared to outshine him. And Howard emphasizes how the studio heads protected him because his films consistently earned awards and prestige, making executives willing accomplices in the cover-ups of multiple scandals that would have ended the career of any lesser figure. The fourth actor Howard names is a towering icon of Western films, a self-proclaimed patriot whose rugged masculinity defined an entire generation of Hollywood storytelling. Yet Howard reveals that off-camera this actor wielded his political influence like a weapon, pressuring studios to fire union leaders, pushing for the blacklisting of actors he deemed un-American, and creating an atmosphere of fear during the Red Scare that destroyed the livelihoods of dozens of innocent performers, some of whom never recovered professionally or emotionally. And Howard explains that this actor's reputation as a heroic, morally upright figure created a paradox that blinded the public to the authoritarian crusades he conducted behind closed doors. Next, Howard turns to a glamorous Golden Age leading lady, celebrated for elegance and sophistication, but who was notorious within industry circles for her calculating ambition, her ability to manipulate studio executives, and her willingness to sabotage the careers of any actress who posed a threat. And Howard recounts stories from former costume designers, personal assistants, and makeup artists who claim she used smear campaigns, planted tabloid scandals, bribed columnists, and even collaborated with private investigators to gather compromising information about her relentless quest to protect her status as Hollywood royalty. And Howard contextualizes this behavior as part of a broader pattern in the era, in which powerful actresses needed to fight twice as hard to maintain their status, but sometimes crossed moral lines in ways modern audiences rarely imagine. Finally, Howard arrives at the sixth and most disturbing figure, an Oscar-winning dramatic actor whose emotional performances earned him worldwide acclaim, but whose off-screen behavior was predatory and predicated on the studio's absolute protection. For Howard describes a harrowing collection of sealed studio memos, retired security personnel testimonies, and accounts from descendants of early Hollywood insiders, all of which paint a portrait of an actor who preyed on vulnerable newcomers, threatened anyone who resisted him, and relied on corrupt law enforcement relationships to make police reports disappear. And Howard details how several attempted exposés were crushed by studio lawyers. Gossip journalists were bribed to run glowing puff pieces instead of real stories, and some victims were forced into studio-arranged hush settlements that barred them from speaking under threat of career destruction. As the video continues, Howard broadens the conversation, explaining that none of these 6 individuals acted in a vacuum. Rather, they thrived within a system designed to elevate stars to godlike status, allowing abuses of power to flourish because the studios made more money protecting villains than exposing them. And he draws comparisons between the Golden Age and modern Hollywood, discussing how the dismantling of the old studio system, the rise of independent journalism, and the ubiquity of digital communication have made it far harder for contemporary stars to engage in similar unchecked behavior, though he warns that abuses still occur when power consolidates behind closed doors. In his closing remarks, Howard urges viewers to reconsider romantic nostalgia for the so-called good old days, emphasizing that while the films of the era were masterpieces, the environment that created them was often corrupt to its core, built on the suffering, silence, and exploitation of individuals who lacked the power to defend themselves. And he encourages today's audience to learn from these hidden histories so future generations of actors, writers, and crew members can thrive in an industry defined not by secrecy and manipulation, but by transparency, accountability, and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. Because only by acknowledging the shadows behind the golden glow can Hollywood become the place it pretends to be. Thanks for watching.